Well, I have 1 o'clock. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to the Brazos River Authority's Lower Basin Customer Meeting. My name is David Collinsworth. I'm the GM CEO. This is really different for us from the perspective of we've never done a customer budget discussion online, virtual, if you will. And it's a challenging topic to discuss. We typically do these, for those of you that aren't as familiar, we typically have 3 customer meetings face to face in different parts of the basin. And it allows for a lot of interaction during lunch. Very seldom do we get many questions, which, we're really open to taking those questions. But typically we get more questions around a piece of chicken fried steak than we do just people asking us questions in a public setting. So for that, I'd challenge you today, if you have questions for us and you don't want to ask them in front of everybody, email them to us or call your contact at BRA or even reach out to me, and we'll do what we need to do what we can to answer your questions and make sure that you're satisfied with the answer and understand what's in our budget and what's in our numbers and what our projects looks like and things like that. So this is new for us, and hopefully this will be our last virtual meeting. Hopefully it'll be our last virtual budget meeting anyway. We're going to continue some things virtually that we'll talk about in a little bit. So anyway, we're typically our customer meetings, we have various discussion points. We're not going to do that today. It's going to be me and David Thompson. And one of the reasons that we're not going to do that is because we've started the Brazos Brown Bag lunch meetings. Our board has moved to 6 board meetings a year. In the week following the board meetings, typically on Thursdays, we've been hosting a brown bag 1-hour meeting at lunch to go through projects and talk about water supply and talk about the things that our board just considered. So that's something that we're going to continue to do, and we look forward to you participating in those. You can go to our webpage and learn more about the brown bag meetings that we do. We'll talk about just a few things before I turn the program over to David. One, just anticipating questions. We're at the end of a long process of developing a scope of work for permitting Allen's Creek, and hope to present that to Houston in the very near future. We are still in the appellate round of court and would anticipate that this would continue on to the Supreme Court for the next few years. But our goal is to begin permitting that reservoir as soon as possible and not wasting time on the courts. If the courts decide what they decide, then Houston and BRA can true up financially if we need to, or continue down the road of a joint project. So Allen's Creek, we think, is moving forward. We've got the engineer team selected, and we just need the scope of work finalized to sign that contract. Another thing that's different this year is that instead of just presenting our scope of work to our board as they approve the annual budget in July, back in January, we had our first ever strategic plan workshop with our board and worked through the strategic plan. We included their comments to our strategic plan, and that is on our webpage for your review. So if you'd like to go and look and provide us comments on our strategic plan, I would certainly be interested in hearing your perspective on that document and where you think it needs to go and how it reflects what the BRA does. So take time to do that if you can, and we would certainly appreciate it. With all that said, I'm going to turn the program over to David Thompson, and he's going to walk you through his financial projections for next year that we will take to the board for their consideration in July. They've already seen this presentation back in April, but this is or May, I guess. This is for customer input so that we can present this to our board later on in the summer. So David Thompson, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Let me load the slides here. Good afternoon. What I have here is proposed budget. This format that I'm going to present to you is a little different than the other customer meetings we've had before. And this is pretty much similar to what was going to be presented in the July board meeting. Why I say that is because we're going to be doing the elements of rate making, or how did I calculate the $83 per acre foot that we're proposing for it. I am presenting 3 budget periods here, only to remind folks that between 20 and 21, we did not raise the rates due to COVID-19 and helping out our customers. So let's take a look at the expenses. The water supply O&M expenses went up about $3 million from 21 to 22. 3 key parts of the increases were giving our employees increases for next year, which we didn't do in 21. Second is the new hires we have. And then third is the Army Corps of Engineer increase in their budget from 21 to 22. I'll talk a little bit more about that in one of my later slides. The next area is debt service that is subject to coverage. This is debt that has covenants built into it that requires us to have certain coverage, as well as our board has requirements for that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later when we get down into the debt coverage ratios. Now, the other debt service we have is the loans we have, and it's not subject to coverage. We have loans with the Corps of Engineers for the 8 lakes we have. That is the water storage for them. We also have Allen's Creek in this is a state participation fund with the Texas Water Development Board. And there is the 30%, which is $6 million. And then we've added back in a $14 million, which is the 70% of Houston's portion per the legislation that was passed back in 2019 and passed and signed by the governor. That is an increase of $1.4 million in debt service. Next is the operating projects. And those are projects that we do assessments, we do studies. They could be repairs, they could be software. They're everything that is not built for our major infrastructure, our capital infrastructure in our basin. And later I'll talk a little bit about the capital projects we have out there too. That gives you a total of $59.4 million in expenses. Now let's look at the other revenues. We have non-system water revenues, and this is basically our 2-tier customers, which is where a customer pays one rate for the water used and a lower rate for the water not used. And our utility customers, these are some of the oldest contracts we have, and those rates are set by the contract. Next is our water supply revenues. This is East Williamson County treated water that we sell to our customers. It includes Sugarland, a waste treatment plant that we manage and bill the customer for. It has grants, it has water permits, interest on our investments, things like that goes into that revenues, giving you a total of $18.6 million in revenue. Now let's talk about the debt coverage requirement. That is required by our board at 1.3 ratio. It is also built into the bond issuance of covenants there as well. So what you do is you take 30% times the 2.5 million of debt service coverage. That gives you the 761,000. That's the surplus we need to achieve in this calculation. So you take the 59.4, subtract out the 18.6, add back in the 761, and that gives you a $41.6 million that we need from our rate holders. You divide that by the 483,000 acre feet of our system rate contracts that we have. That gives you $86. Now I have a tool in our toolkit in the rate making thing is to lower, we can smooth out these rates. It's called rate stabilization reserve. And that has been approved by our board too, to use these reserves. And we're going to use $1.5 million in the 22 budget. And that brings the need from our system rate holders down to 40 million. Calculating that divided by your 483,000 acre feet is $83 an acre foot. And the reason I got it to 83, that is what I've been projecting to our customers and to our board for the last couple of years. Later, I'll talk a little bit more about rate stabilization reserves and how that's going to be used in the future. So let's now take a look at the raw water sales. We have 724,000 acre feet. We talked about the 483,000 acre feet that our customers have, which is about 67%. We also have utilities, which is like TXU and NRG. We have our two-tier customers in there as well, which have the two different rates. Fixed price, we also have the Colorado Basin, where LCRA, we're contract with LCRA for about 25,000 acre feet. And those are supplied to our three customers in Williamson County. And then the agricultural rate. Revenues. There's the 40.1 we talked about that I need from the system rate holders. Non-system water. And then you can see the lake operations, East Williams County, the treated water we sell, Sugar Land, the waste treatment plant, grants and stakeholders we get, management fees. The management fees is tied to another big revenue piece, which is the cost reimbursable customers. These are customers like Temple Belton, Dozier Farms, Williams County Regional Raw Water Line, that we bill every dollar of cost that's incurred in those programs. We're able to bill them back dollar for dollar. You will now see, later on, you'll see the 14.5 in the expenses. We do get a management fee from those customers that we manage though, and that's about 500,000. So here's a look at the rates. And we talked about the $83. Agricultural rate is 75% of the 83. Here's the two tiers. These two tiers, other fixed utilities, are all average rates. And these, we don't get approval for those in July because they're built into the contracts. So, but we do calculate some of these rates later on in the year when we get the CPI indexes out in November. Talk a little bit about the expense assumptions. We're planning on a 5% increase for the employees for next year, which is in line with what we normally give as increases for the employees. We're also adding 9 full-time positions, and those out of those 9, we're taking out 3 of the part-time positions and making them full-time in the nine full-time positions. BRA share of the OMX for the Federal Reserves is $6.3 million. That is an increase from last year. It's about $13 per acre foot of the $83. And again, those expenses are used to share to maintain the 8 core lakes that we have in our basin. The operating expenses. If you take this 47.5 to 5.8 and 6.2, that is your 59.4 that we talked about before. Also, you can see in the cost reimbursable, the 14.5 matches to the revenue I just showed you of 14.5. Again, our operating projects, which don't bill out to major infrastructure in our basin, you can see they range from assessments, studies, some are software, and some are minor repairs that we have to have. But now let's talk about the capital improvement projects. And you can see the biggest part of it is the new water. And it's easier to see the projects themselves than on this pie graph here. You can see Allen Creek is one of the biggest ones we have. We also have 2 projects, which are the Williamson County Regional Raw Water Line Phase 3 pumps and copper ion generators. Those will be paid by our customers and not the system rate holders. Also want to make sure you understand that the 65 million that we have is going to be paid out of current reserves. And I'll show you a little bit about that, why we have that money to spend. That 65 million will not impact our system rate holders. Here it just gives you a 5-year plan of our capital projects. And you can see the amount of monies we're planning on spending in each year and where we're spending it. And our 5-year forecast. Now, I just talked about earlier that we're paying for out of our current reserves. We're going to start, the plan is that we'll start with about $118 million in working capital. And that will pay for the $62 million that we planned for in the projects. Do remember that there's about $2.5 to $3 million that's going to be paid by other customers. The rate stabilization reserve, We're going to use 1.5 in 22, and then we're going to use 2.1 in 23. And after that, our rates should be back on track to where they were. So here are the rates, and you can see in using the rate stabilization reserve, we didn't have any large spike in 22 and 23, and then you get to 24 and on. Those are the rates that I've been projecting for the last 2 or 3 years. You can also see the balancing act we have to do with the debt service coverage. We have to meet that. And then we also have to meet the other reserves that our board requires of 90-day working capital, contingency reserve, and self-insurance reserve. All of that balances out and helps us determine what kind of rates we have to set. Here's just a look at the 10-year rates, and the intention is to keep the rates on a steady incline. We do have major infrastructure that we're going to be building out in outer years to where we'll be paying large debt services in our debt that we have coming up. And the intention here is to keep the rates on a flat line up and not incur any large spikes in rates to our customers in the outer years. As always, all items will be considered by the board in July, and then we will be asking for their approval for the rates as well as the approval for the budget itself. And with that, are there any questions?
David, would you take just a few minutes and talk about the rate implications from our agreements with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and how that impacts our rates? And then Brad Brunette, Central Lower Regional Manager, would you take a few minutes and talk about the process that we go through with the Corps a couple of times a year to review their budgets and their projects? Would you guys explain those things, please?
Yes. It is $6.3 million that we have budgeted for next year from the Corps of Engineers, and that is to help pay for our portion based on the water storage we have in each of the lakes. And that is equivalent to $13 an acre foot out of the $83.
Yeah, this is Brad. Following on to what David said, we meet several times a year with the Corps of Engineers staff. We meet twice a year with them so that the folks actually out at the reservoirs can go through all of their planned maintenance and capital work that they've got planned at the reservoirs. Part of those costs, like David said, we are responsible for helping share some of the costs with respect to flood control. We do not share in those costs, so not all of the money that the Corps spends are we responsible for paying a share, but all of those costs that are associated with water supply are. And so, like I said, we meet with them a couple of times a year where they review their proposed budgets and the appropriations they're getting from Congress to spend on O&M and what our percentage of that will be. And then ultimately their financial folks provide us with forecasts looking ahead in terms of, not just next year, but I think for the next 3 to 5 years as well, what our operations and maintenance expenses will be. So we try to coordinate with them as best we can to get an idea of what our expenses that are going to be.
Brad, while I have you on the video, would you take just a few minutes and talk about our integrated resource planning future efforts?
Yeah, so we've talked about that before, maybe at the 2019 customer meeting. We didn't have one last year because of COVID, but we've got a number of projects going on. David showed you some of those in the capital project slide, and we've got a bunch of different things going on, and we've got others that are coming up in the future. And so we've got a new effort underway. It's called our Integrated Water Resources Planning effort, where we're going to be taking a more holistic look at our entire system rather than kind of project by project. To some degree, we've done that in the past, I guess I would say more informally, but this is a more formal way of looking at all of those projects holistically, not just looking at the direct projects themselves, but looking at risk factors for the projects. Some projects are more risky in terms of whether you're going to be able to get them done or not. Some projects may have more climate risk. Some projects may have more financial risk. And so we're embarking on an effort to put together what we call our long range integrated water resources plan for the entire basin. We're starting in the Little River watershed, which is upstream of the lower basin area. It's the area of the basin with Lake Belton, Stillhouse Hollow, Lake Georgetown, Lake Granger, and Lake Proctor. But it's a significant part of our basin, a significant part of our water supply, and we're going to kind of pilot this effort there over the next year or two, and then roll it out for the entire basin from there.
Thank you, Brad. One other initiative that I want to visit, let me turn my screen on here so you can see me. One other initiative that I want to introduce to you, if you watch some of our board meetings, you've heard a little bit about it, but our board just approved the Brazos River Authority to get started on a risk-based asset management approach to how we prioritize our projects. It'll be, right now we do asset management just like a lot of people do. Our asset management is our software is old, and the way we evaluate our projects necessarily doesn't include as much risk assessment as we should or as we would like. So we've started down the road of creating this risk-based asset management process that will do a lot. It will allow us to better justify and prioritize the projects that we're doing that are paid for by our ratepayers. It will allow us to be more transparent in showing you those projects, and it will also be a really valuable tool, amongst other things, for rate making in the future and rate projections in the future. It will help us go way beyond 5 years in understanding the large capital projects on our older pieces of infrastructure and how that's going to impact our rates. So we're really excited to get started with that. One other thing that I want to tell you about before we open up for our Q&A is the BRA. We just finished our sunset process. The governor just signed our sunset bill a little over a week ago. So our sunset report, for those of you that haven't already read it, you're more than willing to go online on our webpage and read about the BRA sunset process. And there's some good recommendations that were made in the sunset process that we are working through to implement now. So anyway, I just wanted you to know that was out there so you could read it and follow along. With that, I'd like to open it up for any questions that you may have on our projects or our budgets or BRA stuff. Crickets are chirping. Anybody have any questions that you'd like to ask? And again, if not, if you want to reach out to us through your personal contacts with the BRA or email, that would be fine also, or phone calls.
Hey, David, this is Sugarland Mayor Joe Zimmerman.
Hey, Mayor, how are you?
No, I'm doing great, David. Hey,
Great.
Can you talk any opportunity for flood control? I know we've talked to you about that in the past. What do you see with that going forward?
I'm going to reach out to Matt or Brad Burnett to talk a little bit about the flood planning process that's getting started and what our role looks like and kind of what you guys see.
Thank you, David.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, Brad, do you want to go? You want me to go?
Go ahead, Matt.
So during the 2019 session, the legislature passed Senate Bill 8, which created the state's first flood planning process. And that essentially breaks the state up into 16 different regions. And each of those regions will put together their own regional flood plan. And the purpose of that is to look at localized flooding issues and develop mitigation solutions for each of those local areas of flooding. The Lower Brazos, which is Region 8, has started having its meetings. I think they're on their 4th meeting at this point. They have a website, lowerbrazosflood.org, which I'd encourage folks to go look at. They're in the very early stages of their process where they're just kind of getting things started. They picked a technical consultant similar to water planning, and they're kind of kicking things off to begin the process of developing their regional plan. I think the first regional plans are due in 2023, so it's going to be a really short time frame. But that is really the process that the state put together to require local areas to look at localized flooding and develop solutions. And the key part about it is once these regions develop their plans, the mitigation solutions that are in those plans or the strategies can receive state funding through the funding the legislature created at the same time they created the planning process.
Okay, yeah, thanks, man. I'm familiar with that process. And I guess my question was along, so you guys still believe, or because I know you participate in that, I think you guys are the government agency in it. I think you're the ones that sponsor it. So you're still on plan for that. I mean, you're still on schedule is my question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think that every region is kind of early in their process, but everybody seems to be on schedule to at least have their initial plans in by the deadline that's been established by the board.
Okay.
So Matt, is it fair to say that now is the time that communities or counties or entities that have concerns need to be putting those in some type of format to present to the flood planning group, so for study and consideration?
Yes. So each of the groups right now is doing what's called their pre-planning process, where they go out to the public and not only explain what the planning process is about and how it works, but also solicit input for what each local area wants them to be looking at. So really right now is the time for local cities or counties or different types of entities to involve themselves and inform that process. And actually, I think our next meeting of the Lower Brazos, which I sit on as the secretary, is Thursday.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, any other questions? Any subject? Okay, well, we'll continue on finishing our budget process. We'll present it to our board in July. Shortly after that board meeting, we'll have another brown bag on the Brazos where we talk about our water supply and our projects. Another thing that we're excited to unveil in the near future will be a more interactive spot on our webpage for our customers and the public to follow along with some of our projects, follow along how we're spending our money, what we're prioritizing, and kind of it'll allow you to follow our projects from this type of budget discussion through fruition and milestones. So look for that in the near future on our webpage. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, we appreciate everybody tuning in today and hope to see all of you soon in person. Thank y'all.